Welcome everyone to a LouisvilleWargaming.com post-analysis battle report. Alright, this film is a critique or analysis of the linked battle report between the Lizardmen and the Chaos Warriors in Chapter 3 of the Tamarkan campaign. What I want to do is kind of go over how the game could have played out differently and kind of analyze the position from both sides to see how Chaos could have worked a little bit differently to pull off a different result than what happened in the actual game. Now, in the actual game, the Lizardmen pulled off a victory in a dawn attack, and there were a couple things that happened in the game that I think could have gone differently, which would have definitely changed some of the outcome. Now, I want you to also bear in mind that it's a lot easier for us to sit back and analyze these games once the game is done, and I certainly wasn't a part of the game, so it's a lot different when you're sitting on the outside looking in. So this isn't to give anyone who played the game any disrespect or to make them, to nitpick at them. If you notice, I do a lot, or I mention a lot in any of my online posts or in my talks. I talk a lot about chess, and I try to relate chess to Warhammer because I see a lot of similarities between chess and Warhammer. And one of the things you'll notice in chess is that a lot of the good players, they take notes. They actually annotate their games, and then when they're finished, they can take those games and they can replay them with those annotated notes, and they can come up with different strategies, or maybe just look at what they might have done wrong, or kind of shore up some weaknesses. Being human, we all make mistakes. One thing I'd like to point out through anything, just in playing the game of Warhammer, is that a lot of this depends on dice rolling. However, we can't lay the onus of blame on the dice all the time. And I know when I started out for a few years, I used to complain about my dice rolling, and that was, you're gonna roll bad sometimes, and there's no mistake. I had a tournament game where it was a Gunline Empire army back when 6th edition started out. I had 6 cannons and 2 Hellblasters. And turn 1 of that tournament, I misfired 6 cannons and misfired 2 Hellblasters and rolled a 1 for each one. And my opponent asked me if I had loaded dice towards the 1. But those kind of things are rare. And I started to learn that if it's the dice that you're hammering on, why are my important moments so heavily hinged on the dice? So I started to find ways to minimize the dice and how the dice can screw with me. So that's one thing I look at in all my games, is how am I going to stack the game to where I don't have as many critical rolls as my opponent does. Because if I have less critical rolls as my opponent does, that's less of a chance for me to roll bad and really screw up my game plan. Now, that's going to happen in any game. You're going to roll bad, or your opponent's going to roll really good, and that happens. But the dice did come into effect in this game. There was a few things that, had the dice not rolled the way they did, things would have changed. But there were also a couple of maneuvers or choices that I think could have been different. So we're going to explore some of those. So as you see here on the screen, this is the initial deployment of the battle. Now, one of the things I'll note with the deployment, there's nothing glaringly wrong in this deployment, and also this is a dawn attack, so the deployment is kind of random. So you can never really bust anyone's balls for deployment and dawn attack. You just kind of got to deal with how you got to deal with it. So looking at the deployment here, I think the game started off pretty even. Before the game even starts, though, I dissect where I stand, and I'm going to be, again, talking from the Chaos side. So where I stand as the Chaos player compared to my opponent playing Lizardmen. And there's different things we're going to look at. And I wrote a paper that I sent off to my group last year, and it kind of just explains my thought process, and this is just my thought process, so my thought process is my own opinion. And if you have any other opinions or your own way of doing things, feel free to leave some comments, because it's always good to share those. But what I do is I have roles that I assign to each of those shapes, and I kind of forget for a moment that those are little miniature plastic guys, and I break them down into their math, into what they represent, which are numbers, and I assign roles to those. And you'll see in the above picture, we've got some colored dots next to the units. Well, those colored dots represent roles that I assign. And the roles that I assign I use red to indicate hammer units, which are your offensive units. I use blue to indicate anvil units, which are designed to absorb damage. I use white to indicate support units, which are mainly, they're not capable of functioning on their own, but combined with something else, they perform a task. I use green to indicate chafe, which are just, they're there to get in your face and maybe do some minor things to annoy you, but other than that, they're not going to, by themselves, obviously win you any games. And then I also have what I call line breaker units, which are quick, speedy units that are designed to take out war machines and guard your back lines from those units as well. So based off this picture here, you can see I've assigned roles to what I see is happening in the game, and roles also can change. So when you create a battle, when I create an army list, I have roles assigned in my head already, but based off of what my opponent brings, can change some of those roles around. And you have to be able to dynamically move some of those chips around, I guess, to assign these roles. So as you can see on the left flank, the Lizardmen had skinks, salamanders, and chameleon skinks, and that was really it. And that's really not a lot to hold a flank. And Chaos had the chariots and the marauders. And you can see I have the chariots marked as support hammers. The marauders are really a support unit, and then the skinks are chafe that can also combine into support due to their poison, and the salamanders are primarily a support unit. So Chaos really owns that side. In the center, you can see Chaos is really, as you'd expect, nothing more than hammer units, whereas the Lizardmen, they're a mixture of support hammers as well as a couple anvils. Now the Saurus unit on the right of the battle standard bearer I've marked as an anvil simply because they have 30 models, which means they're going to have steadfast against anything in the Chaos army, which by their nature means they go from being an offensive unit to also being able to absorb some damage. Whereas the Temple Guard are probably also the same thing, even though there's only one chip there. So you get the roles there, which kind of help me visualize where I want to try to attack. Now the next thing I do is I try to look at who's going to dominate or who's got the faster movement phase. And the faster movement phase is important because if you own the movement phase, you can dictate the flow of the game. And if you can dictate the flow of the game, you can make your opponent react to you as opposed to you reacting to them. And if you're making your opponent react to you, you're on the offense. So looking at this, I've got it spread out with the movement rates of all of the units. You can see the Lizardmen here have a movement superiority over Chaos. Chaos has got the fastest unit with their Marauder Horsemen, but for the most part, the Lizardmen are averaging in the yellow there. Yellow is just a color I use to indicate moderate speed of between 12 and 14 inches, with the exception of 3 of their foot units. Whereas Chaos, they're stuck with 8-inch movement of their infantry, 6-inch movement of their cannon, then their chariots move 7. And then they've got the cavalry units. But for the most part, the Lizardmen here have the movement. So the Lizardmen have the ability to dictate some of the game in this case. Now, if you're playing against Chaos 99% of the time, your opponent's going to be doing one thing. He's going to be charging straight at you. And in this game, that was exactly what happened. So you can't always bank on that, but predict that your opponent's probably just going to come flailing at you with a wall of iron. And in this case, that's playing right into your hands if you're the faster of the two armies, because you can actually start dividing that Chaos army up and hit them where you want to hit them. The next aspect I look at is the range. Who's got range superiority? Range superiority is important because if you have range superiority over your opponent, that means that you can inflict damage in the beginning of the game more so than he can inflict damage to you. And what that does, like the movement phase allows you to dictate what your opponent's going to do or try to divide your opponent up, range superiority means that you're able to start dishing out punishment at an early phase of the game, which means you can start weakening some of his units. And not only can you start weakening some of his units, but that will often entice opposing players to become more aggressive because they don't like losing models. Now in this case, Chaos has range superiority, which may surprise some of you because no one really thinks of Chaos as having a lot of shooting. Well, they don't really have a lot of shooting, but in this case, they have strong shooting with the Hell Cannon, and it can pretty much reach across the table, whereas the Lizardmen only have a few bits of shooting here and there, and it can be lethal, but it's very close to mid-range. So what this means is if I'm the Chaos player, one of the things that I would have done differently in this game is knowing that I have range superiority, I would not have started the game coming across the table. What I would have chose to done instead is I would have kind of set back a little bit And I would have used my range superiority to hammer on probably the Stegodon or the Carnosaur with my Hell Cannon and try to take one of those guys out. And what this is going to force the Lizardman to do is he can't do anything back to me until he gets in range. So he's going to have to come across the table, and that's what I want. I want him to come across the table and give me at least 2 good solid turns of shooting at him. So I have a good chance of removing one of those pieces before he even gets to me and is able to do anything back to me. And that's a big thing. So if you're a Chaos player, you don't always have to go charging across the table first. Have some patience. Sometimes it's wiser to let them come to you, and then you come and counter assault. Now the last thing I'm going to look at is just looking at how the objects stack up in combat. And you can probably be more thorough than I am, but I just break it down into the strength, toughness, armor values, attacks. And this kind of builds a probability matrix in my head. If I'm moving at a unit, what are the chances of me breaking through it? So here we have in the diagram just an explanation of all of the units. And you can see that Chaos is not short of high strength attacks in this game. Neither, again, are the Lizardmen. The Lizardmen actually have a decent center. The problem with their center is there's not a lot of models there, which means that's a kind of a weak point, or a weak point that could be exploited. Had the Hell Cannon been shooting at the Stegodon or the Carnosaur, you could have removed or weakened that center and had a better chance of pushing through. Another thing I like to do is I like to look at the weaknesses of the two sides. And there was one glaring weakness on the side of Chaos. Now, they have range superiority. They've got a lot of combat. They can handle all these units in combat. But the biggest mismatch in this game before the first turn even started was Chaos suffering from an overall leadership of only 8. Now the Hell Cannon's got a 9, but the Sorcerer Lord, the downside of taking a Sorcerer Lord is your leadership is 8 on your general. And even with a Battle Standard Bear, those, you're opening yourself up to running a lot. It's about like a 40% chance or something like that of fleeing on 2 dice. And the Marauder Horsemen are outside of the bubble, and they're leadership 7. So if I'm the Lizardman player, and I see this, and I realize this, anything that induces panic is going to be huge. Anything that's going to make morale checks have to be made is going to be huge, because there's a very large chance that the Chaos side is going to lose. And actually what happened in the game was just that. It was a lot of key failed leadership checks that caused units to flee and not be able to rally. And that really hurt Chaos. It took them out of the game. Had leadership 9 been on the table, Festus's unit wouldn't have fled at all, because he rolled a 9 on that leadership check. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying skip out on the Sorcerer Lord, because we all know the current metagame is to take level 4 sorcerers as much as possible, and a lot of people follow that, and I'm not gonna try to argue that here. I'm gonna say that if you're a Chaos player, you're not gonna be able to take both the Lord and the Chaos Lord and the Sorcerer Lord. And that means you need to find a way to boost your leadership somehow. And probably one of the key things that I would do differently in just the list building phase of this is that I would have had taken the Banner of Leadership and put that either on my Knights or on one of my infantry units to give them a leadership of 9, because that does really make a big difference. And on top of that, I wouldn't also I would consider the Crown of Command. And the Crown of Command makes one of your units stubborn. So those combined will definitely help you if you're sitting at an overall leadership 8. Now, Lizardmen, of course, they roll 3 dice and they discard the highest. So failed leadership checks on the Lizardmen part aren't common. And John failed a few in the game, but for the most part, it's not common. You really have to stack the odds against him to make him fail those. So anything that bombs your leadership, or just by winning combat by a lot and removing steadfast, is key. But that leadership played a huge role in this game and caused the whole center of the Chaos line to eventually break, especially with Festus running from that failed charge when the Stegodon stood and shot. So something to think about in the list building phase. If you're going to play Chaos and you're going to run the Sorcerer Lord, leadership 8 is bad for the most part. It's opening up a gamble. You're not going to make a lot of leadership checks, or you're going to make a lot of leadership checks, but you're going to fail a lot. And that goes back to that beginning where I was talking about those key moments in the game. Those key moments in the game, you're opening up to have more of them, because your leadership is so low that those dice weigh more now. They do a lot more. They have more of an impact on you because you can fail more. And we're going to remember the failures more than we remember the successes. If I roll 5 6s in a row, that's cool, but I don't remember it. But what I do remember is when I need anything but a 1 to wound and I chuck 1 1. And then I'm going to remember that more. So psychologically, just think of that. You have to find a way to minimize the dice. And Leadership 8 is opening yourself up to having the dice have their way with you. Now, the last thing to look at before just analyzing the game, I like to assign, like I said, roles to units, but I also compare things to chess. And in every army, there's going to be what I call the king unit. And the king unit is the unit that if you take out, more than likely you're going to win, or you're going to have a bigger chance of winning. I actually have that divided into two pieces in my head. I have strong king units and weak kings. A weak king unit is still, it's a powerful unit, but if it's removed from the game, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other army is crippled. Whereas a strong king unit is a unit that it's probably got a lot of characters jacked into it, and when you remove it, the rest of the army can't really function without it. So both of these cases, I would call both of these weak kings. We have the Temple Guard unit would be what I consider the king unit on the Lizardmen, and then Chosen unit with the Sorcerer Lord. I would consider that the king unit for the Chaos side. And the king unit's ultimately what I target, but like in a game of chess, you're not going to get to the king unit right away. You're not going to be able to just bust through there and get them. You're going to have to get rid of those supporting pieces. So then you have the queen unit. And the queen unit is also a powerful unit. And the queen unit is usually one of my first targets, again, because the king unit's usually protected. You're not going to be able to just get to him. Not always, but a lot of times. So the queen unit, if you can remove, is going to take a lot of power out of your opponents. It's going to remove some of their fangs. And here, the queen units I've identified are the Saurus, Battle Standard Bearer unit, and the Rod Knights. After that, I go in descending order of importance. I have rook units, and the rook units are strong supporting units. These are, like their shape indicates, pillars in the opposing army. If you knock the pillars out, you're going to weaken the foundation. Now you can see, yes, we have, the Chaos Army has one pillar. That's the Hell Cannon, whereas the Lizardmen have two, which would indicate there's a slight imbalance here. They have the Stegodon and the Carnosaur, and those are actually, if I'm the Chaos side, I want to get rid of one of those with the Hell Cannon, and either one, because they can both mess my day up. If you remove one of those rooks and hold back instead of just charging across the table, you're going to have them come to you, and more than likely you have a good shot at removing one of those units. And what that's going to do is going to open up 2-on-1s. The Stegodon or Carnosaur cannot handle a warrior unit by themselves for the most part. After the rook units, I have ancillary. I just have knight pieces, and those are support units. They have some power to them, but their loss is ultimately not going to cripple the army. And then finally, we have pawns. And the pawn units are just like they are in chess. They're very expendable, and every army is going to have pawns. And if you lose your pawns, don't sweat it. So I I use the chess analogy to, in my mind, stack up my target priority. So my target priority, again, if I'm Chaos, I got to knock the Stegodon and the Carnosaur out. And then I got to look at that Battle Standard Bearer. I got to find a way to isolate him in that flank right there, because then the rest of the army is not getting those rerolls. After that, the king is isolated, and I can go in for the kill. If I'm the Lizardman player, well, the Hell Cannon's got the range superiority, but I need to find a way to remove that Rot Knight unit somehow, and then try to find a way to divide those two infantry units, because Chosen Warriors and Chaos Warriors are fairly nasty. So those are kind of the pre-battle plans that I would think of before the game starts. So looking at turn one, again, we're looking at the Chaos side to surge forward. I think I would have rather held back. Let them come to me. First of all, he's moving through that difficult or that dangerous terrain. He's hurting himself by moving through it. So let the terrain start doing some of the work for you. Second, the Hell Cannon's got range. Start drilling the middle of the units. Also, the Rot Knights coming up the middle, it's not a horrible move, but something I would have considered also. Those Rot Knights have movement over the source blocks. Maybe instead of pushing the Rot Knights forward, swing them out wide to the right. Now, what is that going to do? If the Rot Knights are wide to the right, that Battle Standard Bearer unit has got to address that. He cannot just leave his flank open. Well, that means he's going to stay over there on the right flank. And if he's staying over there on the right flank, the Battle Standard is not going to be used in the rest of the game. In addition, the Skinks are probably going to flow that way as well. So what the Chaos Rot Knights can do in that case, if they're swinging out far to the right as opposed to moving vertically forward, is you're going to start dividing the Lizardman army up a little bit. Now that Center Saurus unit can't afford to follow the Rot Knights to the right flank, because they're leaving their flank open up to those Chosen Warriors, see? So what the Rot Knights would be doing is creating a one between them against the Battle Standard Bearer, where the Skinks, they might get in the way, but the Skinks aren't really a big threat. At that point, the Saurus unit would have to come forward to address the Rot Knights. No, they don't have to come forward to address the Rot Knights, but they'll probably come forward to address the Rot Knights as the Hell Cannon's pounding on them. And the Rot Knights are going to have a lot easier of a time fighting the Battle Standard Bearer unit one-on-one, as opposed to what happened in the game where they got flanked and broken. And really, I can't stress that enough. If you're a Chaos player, you do not have to rush forward in the beginning. And movement phase is not always got to be vertical either. You can be horizontal. Use the width of that table. This table was 8 feet wide. Use the width of that table. You don't always want to separate your units. And yes, a lot of times there is a good sound strategy to having your units close together, supporting yourself. But in the same token, what you see here is when the Chaos forces move forward, the Lizardmen are able to double team without really any problem. And I'm looking and seeing the second turn, the left flank, Chaos, Brad chose to take that left flank. Not going to fault that. I think that's fine. Take the left flank. It is that center that really, really hurt because, and again, look at the Rot Knights. They're stuck in the middle of the table. They're dealing with skinks. Those Saurus are like, good. Yes, they're able to filter in the middle. And they're filtering in the middle. The Leadership 8 really, really hurt the Chaos Army when Festus' unit runs, because now the Chosen Warriors, look at that, there's 3 units near them, and because Festus is fleeing. Also, because they got into range of the blowpipes, they were taking damage. Whereas if they had hung back just a little bit, that Hell Cannon could have probably removed one of either the Stegodon or the Carnosaur, and in the later part, maybe even started contributing to some wounds on the Saurus Warriors as well. And in turn 3, there was a maybe controversial. The Rot Knights had to choose between one or the other Saurus units. Either way, they're going to get flanked. They could have gone towards the middle. The middle would have busted into the Saurus unit that was smaller, which means they would have had a better chance of knocking them down through wounds to maybe get them underneath 5 models to force a break check without steadfast. That's kind of iffy, though. Honestly, I think that I think either way that's either Saurus unit was going to be steadfast, and either way they were going to take the flank charge. He chose to go after the Battle Standard Bearers unit. The one thing that, like I said, I'm kind of halfway either way about that choice, but he didn't attack the Battle Standard Bearer at all. I think you got to go after the Battle Standard Bearer. You got to go after what he's given that army. 3 dice, take away the highest, and he's given them a reroll on that. You got to kill that. You got to get rid of the Battle Standard Bearer. Any army you're fighting, Battle Standard Bearer and the General, those are your two. You've got to take those 2 things out. You take those 2 key pieces out, and it's going to make your life easier. And a lot of armies today, they're going to run both of those in the same unit, which makes it kind of easier on you because you don't have to split your forces out. So really, ultimately, in the end, there were a few things that on the Chaos side, they created instances where the dice had to succeed for them to succeed, and the dice didn't. The dice did not succeed, and because of that, as you saw, the whole center of that Chaos line turns around and runs. So when you're creating your roster, look at that. If you got Leadership 8, boost that up. That's probably the key thing in this whole analysis. That Chaos Army's got to have some 9s out there. There wasn't a lack of offensive punch at all on the Chaos side as much as it was that leadership, and 8's not low, but it's low enough where you're going to be failing about 40% of your rolls, and you don't want to be failing 40% of your rolls when you're dealing with Chaos Warriors. That's a huge cost that you're going to be taking, and really, again, look at horizontal movement as opposed to vertical movement. You don't always have to move forward. You can use the lateral movement, and that's going to force your opponent to respond. So if you've got range superiority, use it. Target priority, chameleon skinks, they're going to throw some poison at you. They might get a couple 6s on those hits. It's really not that big a deal. If you don't take that left flank, I think the odds are you're going to take that left flank anyway, but you got to take out the rooks. You've got to take out those pillars. You've got to take the Stegodon and the Carnosaur in this game. And I think if you take the Stegodon or the Carnosaur out with the Hell Cannon, that changes a lot of this game. If you've swung out the Knights to the right and you've taken out a Stegodon or Carnosaur, what you've got left in the middle is you've got that weaker Saurus unit, that smaller Saurus unit, and you've got one of the 2 monsters. And one of the 2 monsters and a Saurus unit is not going to hold up to the Chosen, and it's not going to hold up to the other Warrior unit. And I think that right there would have made the game different. Not to say Chaos also did everything wrong. He did a lot of good things too. purple sun. He had the purple sun. If that thing goes off, the Lizardmen are screwed. The Saurus are initiative 1. Initiative 1 in the purple sun, you're going to wreck the whole unit. Also, he chose to charge the Stegodon instead of letting the Stegodon charge him. That's always good. Remember, the Stegodon is basically a chariot, or cavalry, or any of that. If cavalry or chariots or anything that's doing impact hits is being charged, you're taking away their bonuses, and that's good. We want to do that. So, ultimately, to wrap this up, again, look at all your options. Keep everything in mind. Keep your rolls in mind when you're creating your list. Keep your rolls in mind when it's time to hit the table, and use the whole battlefield to your advantage. So, look forward to another one. We're going to be heading into campaign day here in a couple weeks, and chapter 4 will be beginning next month. So we'll see what we'll be bringing out then. So until then, I'll see you later. I hope you enjoyed this.